I've changed. So I'm growing up, but now I have to go on a regular basis. Not much lunch.
Yeah.
All right, everybody got coffee and what you need? Mike?
In a crowd like this, we almost have a pot of decaf and a pot of regular.
Yeah, the youth can drink regular. The ute. Us old. I did a Zoom call and had the one with the cameras in the corner. You can see, I thought, who was the old man in the corner? And I realized it was me. And the other old man was Frank. So I didn't feel so bad, but Grandpa here in the rocking chair. All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome back again. And we've rearranged the table. We've got a couple of new folks with us, or old folks who've returned, or whatever you want to look at it. So grab your coffee, get comfortable. Welcome back, Mr. Meyer, who's returned from a 6 months, 2 months, 6 weeks. How many? A 3 months surgery recovery. So he's back again. Do you want a different pen, Fritz? I have a very nice. I have a very nice pen. There's one on the floor there, Dylan. So, do you want a better pen? I've got some very good pens. You have what's French for pencil? Hey, Mike, what's French for pencil? Un crayon. Un crayon. There we go. Oh, is what? Pim. All right. Okay. I think sometimes when we read the Bible, we think, isn't that nice? You know, we grew up in Sunday school, we know the stories, and there's a risk that we think, well, that was written for those folks back then, and, you know, where do I do with it today? And so we memorize a few verses that land well, or we'll read and go, oh, that kind of connects with me. And maybe we have a danger, or the risk is to disregard it. Or we just kind of read it and go, isn't that nice? It's a bit like buying a car, if you don't know a lot about cars. You're like, hey, it works. You know, I won't point to anybody this evening about buying a car, but as long as it works, gets me there, I'm happy. And then there are car guys or car people. I don't want to be biased anyway, but what's the difference between somebody who just drives a car and car people?
The passion.
The passion, good. Knowledge.
Specifications.
The justifications?
Specifications.
Oh, the justification. Because we need 5 old cars on my driveway.
Hey, I own hobbies.
Good. What are the benefits of being a car guy versus just driving a car?
Intimate knowledge.
Intimate knowledge. Good.
Less likely to be ripped off.
Less likely to be ripped off. Or deceived. Oh, this works well. This is landing well. Thank you, Shelley. Yes, less likely to be ripped off.
Physical experience.
I'm going to land on that for a while. That's good. Yeah. Good. What else?
Physical experience with the car.
Yeah, you engage it better. Good. What else?
Maybe you just don't care as much.
Maybe you don't care as much. You can determine the value of something. You can go, that's more value, that's a less value, or you care less. Yeah. Or maybe you don't care as much because you know, like, I don't really care what it looks like as long as it's got that motor.
Yeah.
That's a positive spin on that. All right. Doug.
Who's the old man in the rocking chair?
There is the old man. Rock. There we go. He's rocking. Oops, I'm over here. My eyes are here. My goal in doing Bible study is not to burden you or overwhelm you or make you go, huh? It is for you to develop car passion. It's like anything. If you spend some time with someone who's really passionate about something, that passion usually rubs off. I have a friend who's like super into golf. I'll be honest, my passion for golf doesn't extend very far. Like, I kind of know what it is. And I asked him one day, I said, tell me, and he went like for an hour and a half or 2 hours, he explained golf, and by the time we were done, I wanted to go golfing. Like, I was like, when are we going? Let's go, I've got to get these clubs, you know. Then I came home and somebody talked sense into me and said, no, you don't want to do that. But I think as we spend time in God's Word, we begin to get passionate about it. Not to puff ourselves up or to say, I know more than you, but so that we can drive better. Because Scripture says that it contains all we need for life and godliness. All that we need to live this life, to make sense of the insanity around us, but also to draw closer and closer to the one who created it. So the purpose of Bible study is not to fill your head with knowledge or to puff you up in any way, but to give you the tools so you can drive this vehicle called life, and then to kind of springboard with Shelley, and to figure out what not to do, not to get conned by something. You know, I was watching a video today and it popped up and it was how to actualize everything you ever want. I went, that's a con. You know, that's not how the world works. So the goal is to keep you from falling into the traps of the devil's lies and the world's lies, but also to make you passionate. Okay, does that make sense? So Romans is a book about life. It is written to a group of people with a very specific cultural background and all this stuff, but it's written about life, and it's kind of a 3-lane highway. And Romans is about the 3 S's. Anybody remember? Yeah, society is the third one.
I missed it.
The 3 S's of Romans.
Sin, salvation,
Close? Sin, salvation, society. All right, what do I mean by that?
Our relationship to each one.
Exactly, our relationship to each one. Yeah.
unity.
Unity. Very good, very good. Yes. Very good. Yes, because initially we're all united to sin. We're all connected to sin, right? This problem. And then we get connected to Christ. That's salvation. And then we've got to live connected to the rest of life. That's called society. There's society in this room right now. Society of believers, society, but also the society we live in. So how do we live? And that society was very cruel. And it was violent. It was patriarchal. All those things we don't like, you know, slavery, crucifixion. That was a brutal society to live in. And so along come these Christians who are being accused of cannibalism. They were accused of being magic. They were accused of being atheists. All these horrible accusations. And along comes Paul and says, live at peace with Caesar. They're going, are you kidding? He thinks we're a cannibal. No, we're to live at peace. So along this road of sin, salvation, society that we all live in, there's a hiccup called our past. Now, how many of you are Mennonite here? There, Joyce, you get count too. Yeah, good. There's a few of us, right? So we have to figure out our past, right? And in that society, how are you proved to be godly? What are the evidences of godliness? Your little babushka thing? Good. What else is evidence of godliness? Your dress, how you dress. Good. What else is evidence of godliness?
The church you go to.
The church you go to. Good.
How good your buns are.
How good your buns are, yeah. How obedient you
How
are.
clean your vehicle is.
How clean your vehicle is.
You don't show joy
No, you're always very stoic.
or emotion for that.
Yeah, very contained. James, after all, says, turn your laughter to tears. They'll quote that. Good. What is evidence in that culture of worldliness?
Rubber tires.
Wearing pants,
Women wearing pants.
having earrings.
Yeah, earrings. Good. Anything else?
Laughing.
All right, for those of you who are non-Mennonites, growing up in your culture, what was evidence of being a good person?
We didn't go to dances in school. We didn't go.
No tattoos? Didn't go to dances? Didn't go to shows? Good.
Smoking, drinking.
Yeah. Smoking, yeah. We don't smoke.
We don't drink, we don't chew. We don't go with girls that do.
Yeah, we don't smoke, we don't drink, we don't chew, we don't go with girls that do. Right. Yeah. What was evidence of being worldly?
Your possessions.
Yeah, your possessions, if you had too ostentatious, yeah. So every one of us has got cultural baggage, right? We've all got a background, whether it's French, Canadian, English, confusion. The Mennonite crowd here, Harlan, you've got a mixed background, don't you? You're a little bit every German there, and so.
And Swede.
What's that?
Swede.
Swede, yeah. Well, the Swedes, you got to eat lutefisk. No, that's the regions. So somewhere along the line in this sin salvation society, there's this little, what about my culture and what about my backgrounds? Now, those of you who kind of moved through it on, you've probably discarded some of that. Whereas the girl wearing blue jeans, cowboy boots, and earrings tonight, right? She might have moved past some of that. Think about the way you've moved back. So this book starts out, and then there's this section in the middle where in the church there were these Jewish people, and they go, and Paul has to stop and do a bypass or a truck stop. He has to pull over from his journey and say, we need to talk about the Jewish question. There was a society that talked about the Jewish question, but that's not what we're talking about. We have to address this Jewish issue. Because the Jews said, how is one Jewish? By what right? Birth. You are a daughter of a daughter of a son of a son of. That's why in Matthew we get the genealogies of Jesus. That's what we get. So you can trace your ancestors. So genealogy is very important. Okay? So you are a Jew by birth. You could become, a Gentile could enter in some manner of fashion, but you could never be fully Jewish because you weren't born. Okay? And how did you become righteous or right with God? By obey the law. Right. So that became the definition of their identity. Just like Mennonites, the definition of their identity is you're a Regier, a Friesen, a Weeb, a Duick, or whatever your background is. A Reimer. Born into it, right? And you kept the law. Kept your hair long, you do all that stuff. And then somebody comes along and says, you know, Jesus. And Paul says, being a Jew is not a Jew by birth, but by faith. He talks about it's the Jews who are circumcised of the heart, born of the Spirit. And it's like saying, well, you could become a Mennonite as long as you have the heart of a Mennonite. That doesn't make any sense, right? And then he says, you don't get righteous by keeping the law, you get righteous by faith. This revolution. And this really upset the Jews. And they began to ask Paul, this doesn't make any sense. So the three issues that come onto the table in these sections of the first set, and now we're on to your notes, page 1, just to refresh, that has God kept his word to Israel? And what's Paul's answer?
Yes.
Yes, because who is Israel?
It's everybody.
Everybody. Israel of the heart. Yeah. So has God kept his promise to Israel? And what did God promise Israel? All the blessings, right? A light to the nations. So being a Jew isn't being a Jew by blood. So he says, yes, God's kept his word to Israel. So all of a sudden you have to start redefining things. All right, second question was, well, what about the law? And what's Paul's answer? The law was never the way you got right with God. Okay, so think about a friend of yours. Are they only your friend when they do what you tell them? When they keep the rules that you've established in the relationship, consciously or unconsciously? Yes. Yes, of course. And if you break the rules, you're no longer... There's that risk, right? Well, if you do that... I had a friend one time who said, that was a complicated story, but I betrayed his friendship because of something he did. I'm your friend. I should be able to disappoint you once in a while. You should be able to... No, his standards were so high for the relationship that the minute I violated them, the friendship was over. I thought, well, I guess I just forgive my friends and we move on, right? And so this idea becomes central, that there is something else at work. I just lost my train of thought.
I was wondering, this whole idea of being circumcised in the heart and
Yes.
being the Israel of faith.
Yes.
If a person goes, if we go back and look at when God made his covenant with Israel,
Yes.
if we look at it in that light, do you see that, or was it?
Yes. Matter of fact, he brought that up in chapter 4, and Ron brought that up on the phone this week. Yeah, because we're going to talk about when did Israel become Israel? Yeah. Was it before the law or after the law? Yeah. Very good. Yeah, good. Excellent. All right, so the other question he brings up is justice. It seems like God's not being fair. So this takes us to question number 3. And now he blends. So at first, by the way, what's this whole chapter about? God's character. Right. It's not about salvation. It's about God, because they were questioning God's character. They're saying God's doesn't keep his promises, God doesn't keep his word, and God is not just or fair. So this passage is about God's character, and that's going to become critical in a few verses. All right, so he blends these two issues together as an issue of the justice of God. And just in your notes, God's choice of making Israel is bigger than they thought, and they said, no, it's not fair that Israel has nothing to do with bloodlines but spirit. That's not right. And then, by allowing faith to lead to righteousness, not the law, they said, well, that's not fair. We had to keep the law for thousands of years, but these Gentiles just had to believe. Fritz, underneath that big phrase that says the accusation, do you have the same notes as I do?
Yeah.
Okay, could you read that paragraph that it's just centered on the page?
Oh, okay. If faith is all you need and God just picks people for his own reasons, he's not really just. God is he. It isn't right that we had to keep the law and be descendants of Jacob while these Gentiles just thrown in here and get the same blessing.
Does that make sense, that question? Can you see why they'd be upset? How dare these Gentiles just stroll in here and get all the promises of Abraham? They didn't have to keep the law. They didn't have to be born. They didn't have to be all circumcised and all this stuff. They could cut their hair. They could even shave their faces to be righteous, you know. And this keeps coming back to this theme of shaving in this group for some reason. But because the Jews couldn't shave, right, while the Gentiles did. All right. So, turn your Bibles to Romans chapter 9. We're going to read verses 14 to 18. And Shelley, I know you've got a good reading voice. Could you read that for us? Romans 9, 14 to 18. So we're going to read this, and then we're going to see how this accusation actually isn't true.
What should we say then? Is there injustice with God? Absolutely not. For he tells Moses, I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. So then, it does not depend on human will or effort, but on God who shows mercy.
Right down to 18.
The scripture tells Pharaoh, I raised you up for this reason, so that I may display my power in you, and that my name may be proclaimed in the whole earth. So then, he has mercy on whom he wants to have mercy, and he hardens whom he wants to.
All right. What's the issue he's addressing here? I kind of already been talking about it, but in your own words, what's the problem he's addressing? Okay, not free will. No. What's the problem? Right in verse 14. Injustice. Why are they charging God with injustice?
Because they feel it's not fair for the Gentiles to get the same blessings as them.
Precisely not. It's not fair that the Gentiles by faith get the same blessing that the Jews got by keeping the law. That's the root of the issue. Okay? So, he says, far from it. What's his answer? Just take a look at 15 to 18. And we're going to unpack this a bit, but at a glance, how does he address the accusation?
God just says he'll do what he wants to do. I'll do what I want to do.
I'll do what I want to do. Good. Anybody else?
I'll tell you what hurts.
I'll tell you what hurts, yeah. You want injustice? I'll tell you what's injustice.
Well, it's kind of like a parent, and they don't really know what's good for them often.
Yeah.
But the parent knows, I know what's good for you, so I'll do what I want.
Good.
Because it was better for you.
Whether you like it or not, yeah. What did the Jews want by their own law? What should have happened to the Gentiles for not keeping the law? Condemned, right? They should have been condemned. But what did God do? He showed them mercy. And they're saying, well, God should be fair. If you don't keep the law, you should be punished. If you keep the law, you should be rewarded. And he says, actually, it's not really about that at all. It's about mercy. And notice in that, there's nothing about judgment on this in verse 15. It's all about mercy. I'll have mercy on whom I'll have mercy. And who did God offer mercy to? The Gentiles. He says, I'll have mercy on the Gentiles, and I will have compassion on the Gentiles. And they're going, but you're supposed to punish them. And he goes, no, I'll have mercy and compassion. After all,
Seems like a big brother wanted his little brother to get punished for something.
That's right.
I got in trouble.
yeah, I got in trouble when I did it. And how come you're nice to them? Because you're a spoiled, my sister charged me that many times.
Is that somehow related to the workers in the vineyard? The
Yes.
injustice of I pay you the same as me, but I had to work since 7 o'clock in the morning, you came at 10. Is
Yeah.
this kind of thing?
Yeah, that's very illustrative of how God, what Jesus is showing is God's character.
Yeah.
And what Paul is reinforcing, because the charges are against God's character. And what is at the root of God's character? Mercy.
Whoever
So-
will be first will be last, and whoever will be last will be first.
That's right, that's
Because I
mercy.
guess you look at those people in the vineyard, and then when it's come down, well, I've earned it.
Yeah.
I've worked longer.
That's right. And that's exactly the issue. The Jews are saying, we earned righteousness by keeping the law. And God says, yeah, that's not how this works. By no keeping of the law, not by works of law. And Scripture's always fighting that human nature to earn. I earn your respect. I earn your... and God says, you can't earn it. It's got to be mercy. Why can't we earn it?
Because we can never be good enough.
Right. Because what's the first 2 chapters of Romans about?
How sinful we are, how horrible we are.
Right. That's why those 2 chapters are important. because they lay that foundation. Somebody says, I can earn God's love. And he says, have you read chapter 1 and 2? Like, do you remember what we talked about, in this reading half an hour ago? Yeah. And so the accusation is God's unjust. And God says, I'm merciful. Because what does the end of James say? Woe to those for mercy triumphs. Remember, what does James say? Mercy triumphs over. Go to James, Dylan. I did try to remember the verses. It was on the bulletin board for the longest time. Because mercy triumphs. I can't remember the reference. Because mercy triumphs over. Anyhow, I'll give you a minute to look there, Dylan.
Is that the end of James?
Yeah, I think it's in the middle somewhere. A lot of help here. Here's a hand grenade. It's in the middle.
This feeling of injustice, even today, I think we carry this with us. For example, the person on their deathbed accepts Christ, and we say, well, I don't say that, but
No.
often you hear, that's not fair. He
Yeah.
found all of his life.
And I had to live all my life.
And
Does
I
this
had
sound
to
like
be
another
like
story about
your
two
dance.
brothers, maybe? Two brothers. One brother said, I have kept all the rules and I've never betrayed you, but he got more than I've ever asked.
The prodigal son.
Yeah. This is another. So this message keeps getting woven through Scripture of people feeling unjustly done by. And God's saying, mercy. Do you find it, Dylan? Okay, mercy triumphs over justice is the phrase. I just can't get the exact reference. That's okay, it'll come. And then he throws in Pharaoh of all people. He says, you want to talk about God's plan? God chose and worked with. So he says, it doesn't depend on the person who wants it, nor on the one who runs, but on God who has mercy. This is one of the key verses about human responsibility and human choice, because he uses two words, wants and runs. Both are action words, right? I want righteousness. He says, doesn't depend whether you want it or not. And I run. That is action. So this isn't about predestination or anything. This is because Paul acknowledges humans want and run. They have will. They have action. So he acknowledges that right in the middle of prayer. But God will have mercy on whom he has mercy. So God raises up Pharaoh. Just a little bit of a side. We're going to look at the whole paradox of Pharaoh for a second. Joyce, Exodus 8:15 and 19. And then Danny, Exodus 4:21. And we won't read them all. There's too many there. 4 should suffice for tonight.
Dan, do you want that scripture?
Yes, I do.
It's James 2:13. Well, 12 and 13, I could 12 and 13. Accordingly, James counsels believers, so speak and so do as those who will be judged by the law of liberty. For judgment is without mercy to the one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment.
You could stick that right in here. For mercy triumphs, and that's going to come up later on. Mercy, God's mercy triumphs over justice. Now, does it? Is God not just? Well, no, Paul's going to bring that up later on. He's going to say, Christ took all our sin on us. So God's justice was satisfied through Jesus, which allowed him to be what? Merciful. Yeah. Good. All right, Joyce. Exodus 8:15, and then just comma, pause, jump down to 19. Danny, Exodus 4:21, and then jump over 7:3.
8:15 is, but when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said.
And then 19?
And then 19, the magician said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he would not listen, just as the Lord had said.
So who hardened Pharaoh's heart?
God.
What the first verse says? Pharaoh hardened his heart. He hardened his own heart. Pharaoh hardened his heart. But then along will come Danny with Exodus 4:21 and 7:3.
The Lord said to Moses, when you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders I have given you the power to do. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go.
Good. And then 7:3.
But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my miraculous signs and wonders in Egypt.
Good. We could have Joyce read a few more, by the way, 19:32 and then 9:34. So, who hardened Pharaoh's heart? Both. He hardened his own heart, and God hardened his heart. Yeah. Was whoa, that's a bad, you don't want to get those two letters mixed up. Pharaoh's heart, not Harrow's. I'll let you figure that one out, Doug.
I get it.
I get it. Was Pharaoh's heart inclined to being hard?
It must have been.
I think so.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
But it's both, right? Here we get these weird, both. All right, so, onward.
But I guess from that, a guy looks at that and says, well, it was hard because God made his heart hard.
Right.
And it was God's fault from the beginning that his heart was hard.
But what was Pharaoh's heart by nature?
It was hard.
He had a hard-hearted nature, and
Because you look at this and you go, see, well, God will, and it looks, and so from this you get the idea that, oh, well, he'll save someone, he'll condemn others,
Yes.
right? And,
yes, he will harden whom he, yes.
and that's what it says.
And yet it
But
says
it's
that
not
Pharaoh's
like
heart,
he took a soft heart and made it hard.
no, he found a hard heart.
Because he wouldn't listen to Moses and Aaron.
That's right.
it said.
So God finds the tool he needs and uses it for his purposes. He needed Pharaoh's heart to be hard, so he found a hard-hearted Pharaoh.
Does
that make sense?
Who made him that way, though?
He did, but it says Pharaoh hardened his own heart. He chose to harden his heart.
Was
Was
that
he
in
a
his
nice,
vow?
was he a nice kid? Did he have an abusive family and then he became like that? What happened to him?
That's a very good question.
I know it is.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you,
And
Sherry.
now we're superimposing some psychology
That's
into
right.
the question, right? Which is back to what we talked a long time ago. Are you good? Are you born good?
That's right.
Or was Pharaoh not?
So in your own experience, are people born hard-hearted or are they born soft-hearted?
Some people are born mean.
That's right, they are. Yeah. And some people aren't. Some people are
It's
very...
not their fault.
No, that's right. So,
Then we're going into another gray territory.
yes. So is Pharaoh responsible for his actions?
Yes.
Yes. So, is Pharaoh responsible for his actions?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Is Pharaoh not responsible for his actions?
Yes.
Yes, both. So when someone... There's a great episode of House. Remember House?
Oh, don't.
Yes.
Did you like House?
I'm getting some dewormer because everything. Have you watched the show? Seriously, they always do a lumbar puncture and then it's a parasite. And I made fun of him, and now I'm like, that's it. I know I have worms. So that's where you're going with that.
No. Also, I learned don't swallow a toothpick because there was an episode of House where he had internal bleeding. He'd swallowed a toothpick.
Oh, okay.
But there's an episode in House where there's a guy who is a homicidal maniac. He is in jail for multiple murders. And House finds out that he had a tumor.
Yes, I saw that one.
Yeah. But House in the end says he's still guilty. So the question was he responsible for his behavior because he had a tumor? And House says, yes, he is. Is he responsible? No, he isn't. So is Pharaoh's tumorous heart, is he still responsible for his actions?
I think so.
It's a different kind of justice because if it's insane,
Right.
right, then the punishment should actually look, or the consequences, for a better word, should look different.
Yes.
Because if you're insane,
Yes.
you're not actually responsible.
No, you're not culpable.
As opposed to someone who is,
What if your insanity is brought upon by your own choices? Or like, I think in example of somebody in addictions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not my fault, I have an addiction. How did that start? Well, by my bad choices, perhaps. So in the end, not always maybe, sometimes, I'm sure there's exceptions to the rule. But you look at it, well, what got me here?
Yes.
And it's even
But
like in the
ultimately, it
laws.
starts somewhere. And even though that, it's something that at this point it's out of your control, you still started on the road. Or his heart was hard to begin with.
Yes.
So he was off to a bad start all on his own.
Right.
He also made a choice.
He did. Because he had lots of times to change his mind. But it appears he didn't want to change his mind because he hardens his heart. But it appears there's other verses we didn't read that will confirm both sides of the stories. I guess that's what I'm putting
Because
forward.
it kind of suggests that he would have eased up sooner.
That's right.
Had God not hardened him.
That's right. Yeah. Because God needed him not to ease up.
Joyce had a comment.
Yes. Thank you, Prince.
I was gonna say, it's like in our judicial system, our law system, somebody, goes and kills 10 people, but they say he's insane, so he's not responsible.
Right.
No, he still did it. It's still his physical body that. did
Yes.
that. He's still responsible for what he did. I don't think he should get off on it.
Right. Because the issue we debate is actually this is central to the discussion is culpability or responsibility.
Yeah.
Right? So we hold people culpable for their actions. But there are certain people we don't. Minors, for example. So if a 7-year-old accidentally hits his brother in the head with a hammer and kills him. Now let's say Danny accidentally hit someone in the head with a hammer. Would we hold him guilty for his actions?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd call it involuntary homicide. Right? We'd still hold him and he would still be punished. But if a 7-year-old did it, we would not charge him with involuntary homicide. We wouldn't hold them culpable. Why? Because they're not responsible.
Well, what if it's intentional?
That's right. Well, let's say it was intentional to hit his brother on the head with a hammer. Would we throw him in jail?
Because there are kids who do commit.
Absolutely. There are children who've killed children. But what happens to those children?
In the States, they will be held accountable. So
Yes.
it's different,
Yeah.
from country
Yeah.
to country.
Yes, in Texas, they execute handicapped people. Yeah. That's a different ball of
That's
wax.
equality.
What's that? Yeah.
One
Well, Lucy,
equality.
yeah. And
Yikes.
this issue of culpability, of responsibility, is something that we as a society wrestle, and actually this is wrestled with here too. Because the Jews are saying these Gentiles should be held responsible for their actions. They should be punished. And Paul comes along and says, God in his mercy does not hold them responsible. He takes that responsibility and pushes it on. This elevates the gospel. Does that make sense? He holds Christ responsible for their actions.
I don't know if you've heard of this word, antinomy.
Yes, I have, yes.
We're both truths or
Yep, and it fits the...
true.
Yeah, I think it fits well. And that's right, because you can be not responsible for your actions, but be responsible for your actions at the same time. The sleepwalker, right? Do you hold them responsible for their actions? Let's say they total your car. Anyway, I wish we had an insurance adjuster here and how insurance works, because insurance is the great debate about who's responsible, right? Yeah.
Whoever's name's on the paper.
Who's ever willing to take responsibility. So, are we responsible for our sin? Yes, and yet Paul comes along and says we're slaves. Is a slave responsible? All right, we got to move on. Good, excellent. All right. So, Paul says we've been through this already. God has always acted sovereignly. So my point is that God arranged and prepared Pharaoh for the task to come. He found the right Pharaoh to do the job. There could have been a different Pharaoh in place, right? But God said, I need this guy to do this job. So he orchestrates the world such that Ramses is on the throne, and Ramses is the personality he needs him to be.
That's tough.
It is. Poor Pharaoh. Mind you, Pharaoh didn't pay with his own life. He lost his son, but Pharaoh lived a long and prosperous life and was very powerful, and Pharaoh really never suffered. Ultimately, his country suffered, but he did okay. In the words of Garfield, the meek shall inherit the earth, but until the day, the rest of us are doing pretty fine. I think that was a Garfield quote. All right. Paul says we've been through this. God in his mercy chose Jacob and made him righteous without the law. Ron phoned me this week and said, when did Israel become Israel? Before the law or after it?
Before.
Long before. When did Israel become Israel? Abraham. And why was Abraham declared righteous?
Chosen other than these are people.
Yeah. Go back to Romans chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. Like Paul says, we've been through this. What does Romans 4, 1 through 3 say? You don't have... Go ahead, Donna, read it for us.
What then shall we say that Abraham our forefather, according to the flesh, has found? For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. For what does the scripture say? And Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness.
So if the people are saying God's not fair because the Gentiles didn't have to keep the law, what does Paul say?
Abraham didn't have a law.
Abraham didn't have to either.
He had to.
God has always been merciful. And he keeps coming back to this. The character of God is to be merciful. But at times, for his purposes, he has to orchestrate people for his task. All right, we'll get to that. That'll bear a fair amount of weight coming up. All right, remember, this is about God's character. The charges are against God's character. He doesn't keep his word. He doesn't keep his promises. He's not just. Now, Paul leans back into a major aspect of God's character. God is right or just in what he's doing because he acts according to his character. So he's true. What do we call someone who's not true to their character?
Fraud.
A fraud. Yeah. If you're pretending to be something you're not, that's what we call it.
Hypocrisy.
Hypocrisy, yeah. Or deception, right? Or if you're pretending to be not something you are, that's also equally as bad, right? And so they're accusing God of being something he's not. They're saying
A liberal.
oh, the red wave, or the red left, the left wave, the red wing. That's it. Not left wing or right wing. You're red winged. That's not the boot. That's it. All right, I keep beating around this. We've got to land on this. So Paul leans back and says, look, God is doing his character because he's acting according to his character. And what's God's character? Well, his character is the creator. So if you create something, what right do you have to that object? Everything. Okay, think about, let's say you created a child. For somebody that's, good. What right do you have with that child?
Almost everything.
Almost everything, yeah. What's your responsibility to that child? Everything. Good.
Yeah, just because you can doesn't mean.
That's right.
will.
Your responsibility is to
Doesn't
love.
mean you can, because if you're
Right.
if you're just,
That's right.
I can, but I can't.
Yes. Very good. Yeah, you're responsible to raise, care, love, provide, look after it, right? To be merciful towards it. And he says this is God's creation. So how does he operate? Well, the same way. Is God unjust? No. God claims the right to exercise his authority as he chooses. If he chooses to welcome the Gentiles, so be it. If he chooses that faith means a relationship with him, so be it. God is sovereign to choose mercy on Moses and use Pharaoh. All right, then verse 19, what shall we say? Does he still find fault? Who could resist his will? Good point. They said, well, then why does he charge anybody being guilty? If we can't choose, Paul says, you miss what I'm saying here. That's not what we're talking about. There are two aspects of God's will. I want you to think about your will in the same way, very simple. The first is the big picture. We call this God's redemptive plan for the human race. These plans are unaffected by human choice. Whether I chose to follow Jesus or not, does that have anything to do with God saving the human race? No. It's really secondary. God's purpose is to restore what? Creation. That's the big picture. But he also has a little picture, which is a smaller will, and that is God chooses to use human instruments for his will. People are chosen to accomplish his plans, both positively, like Moses, and negatively, like Pharaoh. All right, this is a risky one. If you wanted to get all the Jews in Europe back to Israel, how would you do it? You don't have to be a German to answer this question. But think about that.
Well, you either entice them there or push them there.
Mm-hmm. Carrot or stick. What if they were so entrenched for centuries, and you could say, free land, free house, desert, enemies all around you? The carrot was pretty hard. How would you entice them to, what else could you do to get them there? You'd have to
Pay them.
pay them. You could pay them to go there. Yeah. What else might you do?
Incentivize.
Well, what happened?
You're going to want to go on.
They're going to want to leave in a hurry. Yeah. I'll leave that with you. That was a huge orchestration of God, in my mind, of God's sovereign will. It forced people to move. Anyhow, we won't go too deep into that, but that's just a thought. All right, let's wrap this section up. Verse 20 through 24, Bonniemeyer.
In chapter 9?
Yes, please.
On the contrary, who are you, O man who answers back to God? The thing molded will not say to the molder, why did you make me like this? Do it? Or does the potter not have the right over the clay to make from the same lump one vessel of honorable use and another for common use? What if God, although willing to demonstrate his wrath and to make his power known, endured with much patience vessels of wrath prepared for destruction? And he did so make it known the riches of his glory upon the vessel of mercy, which he prepared beforehand for glory, even us, whom he also called, not from among Jews only, but from among Gentiles.
All right, two little notes here. 22 through 24 are one of the hardest verses in the New Testament because it's one sentence. That is one long, and we're not going to look at that tonight because the remaining pages you have are all about those two sentences. So we're going to unpack those. But what's his answer right now when somebody says, how dare you invite the Gentiles in? How dare you let faith be the way by which God works?
Who are you to say?
Who are you to question God's? How God is unjust. And he says, Stay in your lane. Yes, that's a very good phrase. What if God could have demonstrated his power by pouring out wrath, but instead he chose to demonstrate his glory by pouring out mercy? Which would you rather have, to know God's power or God's glory? I would rather see God's glory, because glory is produced by mercy. Wrath is power. He makes an interesting connection. And he says, sometimes honorable for his glory, a guy named Moses. Sometimes common for his purposes, Pharaoh. What's more common than a cranky dictator? So, they say, that's not fair. We want justice. We want wrath. Not God gives us mercy. And Paul says, when it comes to God, mercy is his character. Let's take a look at a few verses. Doug, Deuteronomy 5, 9, and 10. Harlan, Deuteronomy 7, 9, and Dylan, Hosea 11, 8, 9. These people are upset because God is showing mercy and they want justice. Like the little child who says, or like the older brother, I have worked for you and you've given me nothing. And he got everything. These Gentiles have done nothing and they get everything. We want justice. And Paul says, when it comes down to God, the root of God is mercy. All right, Doug.
5, 9, and 10.
Yes, please.
You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers, to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments.
Good. So wrath goes for how many generations?
3 or 4.
3 or 4. Mercy and love go for thousands of generations, right? When it comes down to it, God says, I will punish, I'll give justice. But my mercy and my love is for thousands of generations. What is the primary aspect of God? Mercy and love. Harlan. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 9.
Understand therefore that the Lord your God is faithful, God who for 1,000 generations keeps his promises and constantly loves those who love him and obey his commandments.
He says, for thousands of generations, right? Thousands is the number of completion. It just means forever and ever and ever and ever. Dylan, Hosea 11, 8, and 9.
How can I give you up, O Ephraim? How can I surrender you, O Israel? How can I make you like Admah? How can I treat you like Zeboim? My heart is turned over within me. All my compassions are kindled. I will not execute my fierce anger. I will not destroy Ephraim again. For I am God and not man, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath.
Good. God says, you stupid, disobedient, rebellious people, I would just love to smack you upside the head, treat you like all these people. He says, but I can't, because my heart is turned over within me. You see that person or that face and they're suffering. This week, I watched a video. I think I've told Daddy, Joyce, and Donna. This couple rescues cows. And they show the cattle trailer backs up, and they open that, and there's this old milk cow. She could barely walk. She's hobbled. And they rescue her. And they bring her out, and she walks on fresh grass. And you see her. She's bounding as best she could. And there's a big pile of feed, and she runs up, and she shoves her head into the feed, and she's rubbing her head, and she is the happiest thing in all the world. Now, is she fit for slaughter? Yes. And then, even more remarkable, they bring out this blind cow, she's so old, and they put her beside her, and the blind cow is rubbing up against this other cow, and you could almost see them laughing, and they're running through the pasture, like hobbled, and they're falling down, and then they show the two of them just sleeping, going, that's mercy. My heart just goes, it just turns over within me. I just, I'll eat beef, don't worry. But you see the ache and the pain of this old cow, and you see her finally living and enjoying life. And God says, I says, you're fit for slaughter. You're miserable, cranky, but I can't. My heart turns over with compassion. So you think about it. We have compassion for dogs and cows. God has compassion for us, for people who are rebellious and angry and cranky and thoughtless and cruel and savage. And God says, I should just squish you like an old bug. He says, but I can't. My heart is turned over within me, for I am God, not man. Paul leans into that aspect of God's character. Where they're saying God should be just and cruel, he says, no, God loves the Gentiles. All right, let me wrap this up tonight. Here's my summary of this whole section. This is called Dan's version. Boo-hoo! We are the physical sons and daughters of Abraham. We are the chosen people. What are all these Gentiles doing at church? Paul says, bah! The people of God are those born of the Spirit, not flesh. They go, boo-hoo! It isn't right that we had to keep the law and the Gentiles just need faith. How come we had to keep the rules and they don't? Paul says, bah! The law never made you right in the first place. Abraham and Jacob were part of the plan even before they kept the law. The law didn't make you special. God's choice did. It's always been by faith, Jew or Gentile. And then they go, well, that ain't right. And Paul says, you want to argue with him, you lump of clay? Look, God in his mercy is at work saving and restoring his creation, including the Gentiles. It's a big project, all centered around faith in Jesus, not the law. He needs some people to do certain things to get the job done. For example, God needed Pharaoh to do his part. Now he had a hard heart, and he hardened his own heart. God just found an instrument already in that shape and just prepared his life so that when the time came, he would do his part. God enhanced and customized what was already there. And now God wants to extend his glory by bringing in the Gentiles. So who are you to tell him that he can't? Because that's exactly what they were doing. They were determining who and how you were in God's family. Does that make sense? That's Romans, the first part of Romans 9. All right, thoughts on that? We're going to wrap it up early because there's a lot more done, and I don't want us to fatigue ourselves because I know this. So, sin, salvation, and society are the story. But the problem is these people had a background. And these new people, these Gentiles, you and I, were coming to the church. And they began to say there's something wrong here. God didn't look like he kept his promises. The law doesn't look like it mattered. Matter of fact, it looks like God's unjust. What's Paul's answer?
God is merciful.
God is merciful.
It's funny though, that the whole thing is centered around, they didn't want everybody in the club. You know, and every one of the hearts of anyone that believes in Jesus should celebrate whenever somebody becomes a Christian, whether it's when they're 20 or 90 and 10 seconds before death.
Of whatever race, creed, of whatever background.
It's all about taking everybody home.
Absolutely. Yeah. But can you imagine the son who worked his entire life and the lousy, no good son, and they get the same inheritance? What does the son who worked hard his entire life say?
Not fair.
Not fair. That's not fair. I stayed. I looked after mom when she was sick. I changed your diaper, Dad, when you were sick. And that brother of mine who partied, he gets the same inheritance as I do.
But I think when you look at it, you say, what is the consequences of not inheriting it?
That's
And if you look at it in that light and you just think, I don't care if I work harder than you, I don't want you to not be included in this. And
So
it
the
isn't
heart
about
of the older
fair.
brother has to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It has to be merciful.
He has to have the character of God himself. Who is the accuser of the brethren? That's Satan, right? That's his title. He's the accuser. Right? This is a very satanic position to accuse your brother of saying, you don't deserve this.
But
When you,
God is also just, right?
Yes.
And so then I think where the human problem is that we see injustice all around us, and then we question the character of God. Because it would
Absolutely.
appear sometimes, like to me it's like, they put the standard up here, God put the standard up here because all of this doesn't make sense. And so then it takes faith to actually believe God is just.
yes. Yes, because we see the moment and the individual act, we see from a street level view of life, of what justice and injustice is. And you can correct me, stop me anytime, Shelley. We apply our own version of justice and injustice. Where God applies his version of justice and injustice. Does that make sense?
But would you say, like, there's obviously all the garbage going on around the world, but I don't think we can blame God for all the stuff that happens because people can be nasty.
But can we blame God for being inactive?
Well, we can
Yes.
say, why don't you intervene, but
These are
that's
different.
different. I think that's different because that's not injustice. He's laid out, this is what I'm offering, and to those who accept it, you get this, and to those who don't, you get this, and that is justice.
I think we can.
Good people have bad things happen to them, right?
Absolutely. I think we can accuse God of not being good. I think that's one of the things we do too. Well, if God's, how come he's not good? Because that doesn't seem like he's being good to everyone in creation. I think that's a not illegitimate.
For me, I always think about it, if we look at it in terms of what's going on now, it is very easy to think that. But if you think big picture, long term, you know what? There's gonna be tough things all through life, and is it fair, is it this? No, but you know what? All I know is when I die, my faith in Jesus will take me to heaven, and it'll all have been worth it. And I think big picture, long term thinking, it changes all that, in my opinion.
Well, I think Paul's established, sorry, should I
Which is
jump
easier
in?
said than done.
Yeah, he establishes the injustice of all people. He says all people are guilty. So we all deserve miserable lives in a sense. He's saying, there's none righteous, no, not one. There's none that seeks after God. And he goes, the whole first, chapter 1, he says, what's remarkable is that there is mercy, not that there is suffering. He says suffering is the norm of life because of humanity's nature. Does that contribute to that thought, or do you want to add to that, Shelley? Or
Well, I mean, I guess it's, that whole argument is that if there was no heaven, would you still believe?
right?
Would you
Yeah.
still follow? Would you still obey, right? Because that is the carrot dangled in front of us.
Yes.
But this is his creation, and you look at.
That's right.
Just to bring up an injustice, that Ryan Gosling got nominated for an Oscar for Barbie, and Barbie, Margot Robbie did
Didn't.
not.
Yes.
Where are we at as far as women's rights? It's
Valid point.
small.
Valid
It's
point.
small, right?
Yeah, but it's a valid point.
It is a valid point,
Yeah.
because there is still injustice even after, sometimes I think God just hates women. Women are the number one.
You would say not, you would say God.
I would say quite opposite, but that's okay. Keep going.
In the history of the world, who is the most persecuted group
Oppressed,
has been-
absolutely.
has been women.
Absolutely.
But that's not God doing that.
No, that's humanity doing it.
But God is allowing it. See, and this is where I go back to, are you
Yes.
guilty by what you do or by what you don't do?
Right.
I'm
Yes.
not looking to be struck by
Yes.
lightning.
Yes. The answer is yes, Shelley.
I'm moving
Yes.
over.
And the big picture is that God is orchestrating all of history, which is very short.
Yeah.
6,000 years that we know of, 10,000 if we want to throw it a little farther back into archaeology, but he is orchestrating for the ultimate fulfillment of justice of all things. So all those injustices will be righted, and the scales will be brought into balance in the final picture. If we keep a narrow perspective, then we see injustice. We have to kind of ride the glass elevator a little higher into the heavens and see the span of history, where God will. I don't think those people that did cruelty are going to have a good time of it, right? Ultimately. And those, blessed are the poor, the meek, he says, if you want to know in the kingdom of heaven who the blessed truly are, it is the women. Like somebody once said, God must love poor people because he made so many of them. That was Abraham Lincoln. So I think the scriptures call us to this elevated, not elevated as an elevated, but long-term picture.
Well, and I think that's what the standard of God is this.
Yes.
Right? So then, but we see this, but we're
Right.
missing all sorts of pieces to the puzzle.
Absolutely.
Because we only have this view.
Yeah, absolutely, Shelley.
And so then it's you see this injustice, and that's where you take the step of faith and be,
Right.
I don't get it, but I know this of God.
Right. And therefore, what should we be doing as Christians?
According to that one verse, we should just shoot for mediocrity.
What? What?
Oh,
What's
it's
the, whoa, I like that interpretation. Shoot for me. That's my new theme. Shoot for mediocrity.
Well, God's going to do what he's going to do.
Oh yeah, don't worry. We're not done this passage yet. Hang tight. Don't land there. Don't worry. We're only halfway down the track. Don't land there. Yeah. God is going to hold everybody responsible. I think that means that we should strive for justice. We should be champions of justice. And so we look at injustice. That's what the food bank is. It's leader saying it's unjust that you're hungry. We will feed you. The church that says it's unjust that you sit lonely. We're going to have coffee and fellowship, right? All these ways that and that's why Sherry and Kevin's church is, to fight for peace is to remember that we are to be the champions of justice for all people. Yeah. When we take God's eyes view of the world and says, you know what? It's unjust that little girl suffers or that happens. So what am I going to do? I'm going to be God's agent of good. Do the works prepared beforehand for me. We'll get into that verse next week. And I will become, so the church then becomes the agent of God's justice on this earth. And then people say, Is God just? Well, look what his people. They've fed the poor, they built hospitals, they built shelters for women, William Wilberforce abolished slavery. There's a guy who said, I'll make God look good. So you're right. I think there are people who say God's unjust. You see, the world is unjust, and God is just, therefore I will act like God. You know what I mean? And I will be an agent of justice.
Isn't it a lot like children and parents? You tell your kids, you know, what the rules are.
Yeah.
And if you disobey, there will be consequences.
Mhm.
And then the kids often come to you, you're so mean, and why are you telling me? And then when they get hurt, then you sit down and have conversations that, didn't I tell you not to? Now, this is why.
Exactly.
Because sometimes our kids think, well, you don't know better than I do.
That's
So
right.
this is what I want in the moment, and then they get hurt, and they come crawling back to you.
Yeah. Or you get older and you go, oh, maybe Dad was right. When
Because
he's,
we see the bigger picture. Maybe we were
Absolutely.
hurt before already, so it's like, okay.
But even still, like what Shelley's saying, those bad things happen to good people, and not by any thing of themselves, but then that makes me think of that where it says, we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. So it might not be good, but he'll use all those things
For
some sort
good.
of good, and that is where faith comes in.
yeah. And we have to decide who's good. We say, you know, happen to a good person, really? Who's good? I know I'm not. There's none good, no, not one. So when bad things happen to me, it's not like, oh, I'm such a good person. Bad thing. No, I know I'm not. Like, I know my own heart, right? So that becomes the other part of the equation. And that way, when good things, but what about see, we always forget what happened to all the good things that happen to bad people. That seems unjust too, right? Well, the guy's horrible, but look how successful he is, right? That doesn't seem right either. Like, both sides are unjust. We often do that. Well, bad things happen to good people. Yeah, good things happen to bad people. The rain falls on the just and the unjust alike.
We were talking about like the highlights and the lowlights of the last year,
Yeah.
and it was interesting that the greatest blessings were also in the deepest dark spots, right? And so never would say certain things were good,
No.
but there's good things in the midst of it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what that verse means. It doesn't mean, like, the death of someone loved you. How do we say that's good? You know, that's the enemy. But there was something good that, there's a small, even something small in that. And part of it is that we have to look, you know, and something good does come out of it. Yeah. Yeah. All things work together for the good. Not all things are good that work together. That make sense? You know, those, when we totaled our car with Mark and I couldn't have said, oh, that was a good thing, you know, but we had to find the good, and there were good things that came out of it. You know, the generosity of the church. Yeah. We left Ontario quicker. Couldn't get out of that province fast enough.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're good to visit for a week and get out of there.
Yeah, exactly like this. There are people living in Kingston.
But couldn't one say that, like, we live in a cursed earth, and there is bad things that happen. Weeds grow in the field.
Absolutely.
Childbearing is painful. Perhaps God sparing us from the full extent of those consequences is good. Like,
Yes.
You got in a rollover, well, nobody died.
That's right.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
And
wheat still
rollover,
grows.
It's just something that happens.
Yeah, because, and we forget that sometimes, that we live in a sin-sick, cursed earth, and the consequences of the curse, we suffer every day. You know, the fact that us, as we get older, ache, that's the consequence of the curse. When there are tears, you know, that's consequence of the curse. And Paul says the earth groans with us. It knows it's cursed. It suffers with us. And it too is awaiting the day of deliverance. Yeah. We are people in bondage, right? We live in Babylon. And that's actually a really good book, but the church in Babylon. How does the church live inside Babylon, right? Exiles. Yeah. In Sunday school, we're talking about Revelation is the book of how dissidents live on the earth. How rebels live against Babylon. Yeah. So we find ourselves, this is not our home. We are dissidents here on this earth, and that perspective. Paul uses I'm going to wrap this up, but I don't want to cut anything off. Paul uses a very interesting metaphor. He says that we are strangers and aliens, ambassadors for Christ. What the Romans did was, Rome was the center of blessing, right, the city, and they would have these cities that were little Romes. And there, everybody who lived in it had all the blessings of Rome. They have hippodromes and culture and art and music and armies, and it was like little tiny Romes all over the empire. And the idea was that people would go, wow, look at that city. They got music and art and theater. They got a horse track. That's great. And they go, that's what Rome brings. They go, oh, I want to join Rome. Okay, no, I want to be a citizen. Right? And he says, the church is like these little outposts of civilization where people go, oh, so that's what the blessings of God look like. That here there is a place of, free meal for lunch, although somebody pays for it. There's a place where I'm accepted, I'm loved, I'm cared for, I'm not alone. And they see these little embassies of of heaven in these little places. And the church's purpose, in many ways, is to be an outpost of civilization, of God's civilization, of the kingdom. And that will draw people in. Come and, taste the water. Go, man, it's better here. It's kind of, otherwise it's ucky. Ucky, that's a good theological term.
I often have problems seeing good out of disaster.
Yes.
And I'm reminded of Steve Noble, not a friend, a neighbor of ours in Alberta. And it was the Pine Lake tornado that hit, and 12 people were killed. And in the morning I was cutting grass and I saw him. I said to him, Steve, did you hear about this? And he says, praise the Lord, he has chosen only to take 12.
Oh.
And still, and I've never forgotten that, because I looked at him and I thought, did I just slap you? Or how can you
He sounds callous.
How can you respond like that?
Yeah.
But he saw the goodness.
Yeah.
Praise the Lord, he said.
He chose only to take 12.
Do you think about that? That's something you probably didn't know anybody affected by that, I'm guessing. When you think about, and then obviously we think about Job, right, and everything like that, and his position.
Yeah, though he's slave, I don't trust him.
And how easy it is to take a position like that when something doesn't even affect us, yet we question God's integrity. You know? And how much more serious and difficult that is when it actually lands up.
It's one of your family that was.
Yes.
It's totally different. Even this, Ethan, the rollover, you three walked away.
Yeah.
Her mom left 2 kids, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So, how do you reconcile that? Like, it just seems to be.
There is one little note here. I want you to notice that Paul doesn't condemn these people. He calls them stupid, like he says, "Oh, foolish man." But he never says, "Let's not talk about this." He doesn't say, "You called God unjust," and he doesn't drop the hammer. He actually takes time with them. He works through, he shows them from their history, shows them from their past, he uses language. He's very patient. He devotes 2 or 3 chapters from this short book to address their concerns about the character of God. I love that Paul is not dismissive of questions or concerns. He's willing to take the time and work it out with them and hopefully find them reconciled to God through his message. And I think there's something gracious in this section. Does that make sense? Yeah, I like that. How easily he could have said, "You're wrong. I'm Paul. How dare you question my authority or what I've said here?" He says, I can get why you'd have some problems with that. I understand that. You're stupid when you do that. You lump of clay, you. But
I'm going to start using that at work.
yeah, you lump of clay, you.
How does this work? Oh, you're stupid, but let me show you.
Yeah, exactly. There is, even in this highly, structured engagement, there is great mercy in this passage, which flows back to, because Paul knew the character of God. God is merciful, so in his writing he's merciful. And we see in Philemon coming up, merciful. God is merciful. God is merciful.
I know I was kind of poking at you today.
That's fine, I don't mind.
In context of my day, I spent the day doing a PD on grief and children. And so then the presenter had like clips of therapy with kids who had traumatic events, right?
Absolutely.
And so then you take the scripture, and it is, God will pick, he does what he does, right?
Don't let it land there. Remember, that's not the end of this story.
I know it's not the end of the story.
Yeah.
But I understand the struggle, is what I'm
Yes.
saying, right? Like,
Yeah.
I understand the struggle. Even as a Mennonite, somebody joins the clan, you're not a Mennonite. You can maybe make buns, not as good as that.
But you're not.
But you're not.
Yeah.
Right? It isn't the same thing as being, so I asked the Hutterites if they would take me on, and they said no. And I said, what if I'm baptized? No. And I said, what do I need to do to get into your club? And they said, you are not welcome.
Yeah, isn't that startling?
What, was that a Lairlight colony?
Whatever the Smiley colony,
Okay, I'm not sure.
it was the kids.
Estuary would let you in.
Oh,
They keep telling me, get a set of suspenders, you already got the beard.
They might let you in, they're not gonna let me in. Sure.
Well, I think they'll take anybody. They're pretty desperate for people to pack potatoes right now.
But it's a good point, Shelley.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a good point. Like this morning, we met with someone who's suffering a loss.
Yeah.
And how do you comfort them? You know, it's what, like you say, well, you know, God caused that rollover to happen. It's all right, tough, you know, God chooses. Like that's no consolation
Yeah.
to that person's soul. So how do we then, and that's why, I'm way ahead of myself. The cruelty of the, sorry, I don't mean to offend, but the doctrine of predestination is cruel. Because it says, God did, and I don't think we're going to find, I honestly don't believe we find that in here. But that's just my prejudicial position, based on research, understanding ancient languages, and 30 years of experience. No, it's based on my understanding of the character of God. No, it's rooted in my understanding of the character of God, that God is, at his heart, loving and merciful. So, if we could stay with the focus of the passage. By the way, we're going to wrap this up. This passage is a dog on a leash. It is so easy to get out of control. It is so easy to go here, and we keep having to pull it back to the center point. This is about the character of God. They are accusing God of not being merciful and just and promise-keeping. And so when you keep pulling it back to the center line, then we don't worry about predestination and free will. Those are all just the dog going like this, right? And we have to pull it back and say, this is about people questioning sound surprising? People questioning the character of God. Is God good? Is God just? Is God fair? Is God cruel? Is God absent? Those are all questioning the character of God. And those questions are never rejected. They're always addressed. All right. Okay, we will pick up the pothole next week, which is verses 22, 23, and 24. They are the most difficult verses in Romans. Yay! Thanks for your patience.